Hi, this is Tony McLaughlin, and I'm delighted to talk to Yaya Fanusie for Centre for a New American Security on the topic of cryptocurrency compliance. Yaya, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tony. Glad to be with you.
Hey, Yaya, it's always great talking to you. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you're engaged in?
Sure. So I'm a researcher that looks at the national security implications of financial technology, and I focus specifically on cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. But I come from several years working in the US government. I actually worked as a counterterrorism analyst for several years. So I was on the more investigative side as an analyst looking at illicit actors. I left government in 2012. Got into the think tank space where my research agenda was national security, but from an economic perspective. And fintech or financial technologies just sort of arose as the policy issue, the national security policy issue that people in DC were grappling with and did not really understand. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies especially, there was just a huge, what I would call almost like an intelligence gap. How does this fit into the security landscape? And so over the past few years, I've specialized in researching how bad actors, whether state or non-state, how they are using or exploiting this technology. How does this fit into the issue of sanctions and sanctions evasion? Those sorts of topics are the things I look at, and I also do some consulting on these issues in terms of how companies can handle compliance when it comes to blockchain technology projects.
Yeah, so I guess you're really on the cutting edge of the development of this subject, because I guess it's true to say that there are many people who would like crypto assets to be fully legitimized, and yet there are still some concerns about their potential usage by bad actors. So where are we in that journey? Where are we in terms of the legitimization of crypto assets and their incorporation into the financial system?
Well, in terms of their incorporation into the financial system, I would say we're not there yet, as many maybe crypto asset enthusiasts would say. What we have is an asset class, if we can call it that is still very experimental, very niche, popular still. But in terms of finding practical usage, I would say is still very limited, right? But there is an ecosystem that has developed. I mean, and it's sufficiently mature where that, there are lots of startups, institutions are taking interest in this asset class. People are building all types of projects. So it's something that I don't think is anything you can dismiss.
Yes.
But if we're going to talk about legitimacy, there's just a long way to go in terms of practical usage.
Yeah. Now, one of those steps is the FATF guidance that came out about the virtual asset service providers having to pass between each other the kind of information that is necessary, to comply with the travel rule for other financial institutions. So, where is the industry in terms of congealing around a solution to those FATF requirements?
Have you heard of the 5 stages of grief? I think it is.
Is it denial?
No, that I think they were at that stage for a year or no. I mean, but in terms of when that came through a year or so ago, a year plus ago, I think the industry reaction was, this can't work. Our infrastructure is not built to support the travel rule, and it won't be built. And there was a lot of foot dragging. There was a lot of pushback. I'd say in the past several months or so that the industry has sort of come around to it. I mean, you see at conferences, it's a topic of conferences. There are lots of associations and informal efforts to come up with different solutions. So the industry is actually working on it. I think that there is, for getting back to the issue of legitimacy, or maybe if we don't use the term legitimacy, but let's say formal, institutional, mainstream use.
Yes.
This is something. I mean, FATF has said there's no exception. I mean, they expect that jurisdictions will ensure that virtual asset service providers are implementing or complying with the travel rule. So I think that is in the future. In terms of the the above ground mainstream compliant crypto ecosystem, there will be travel rule compliance. The thing is, this sector is such that even if we have compliance, there will be outliers, there will be jurisdictions and institutions that don't comply. That's not going to go away. There's going to be, I think, a sort of two ecosystems: the formal above ground, which will be much more compliant, and then you'll have the below ground. I mean, you'll have projects that are focused more on decentralized peer-to-peer tools, and that's going to continue to exist, maybe on a smaller level though.
And Yaya, just to get like our arms around the issues, I mean, is there a particular, for example, AML or financial crime risk with crypto assets? It's always appeared to me that the fact that they're essentially bearer assets is problematic. So what's your take? I mean, given your extensive experience and background also as an investigator, is there something especially appealing about crypto assets as a means of perpetuating financial crime, or criminals will just find and use whichever technology they can, and this is just the latest of them? What's your take on that question?
A little bit of both, because there's the unique. I would say criminals, they're opportunists, right? Cryptocurrencies have some qualities that are going to be attractive, and we could take a page out of the headlines. We're recording this soon after the Twitter hack the Twitter hack scam that just happened. That's a perfect example, right? So these perpetrators, they got access to people's accounts, and what did they do? Their scheme of choice was to tell people, send us Bitcoin. They didn't say, here is my bank account address. Please please wire me money there, right? They're not going to say that. They're going to say, send it to my Bitcoin wallet, because a digital wallet, a crypto wallet, is software that they can control, that's not held by a third-party institution. And if you are silly enough or naive enough to send them that, you can't get it back. You can't go to someone if it's their own personal wallet. You can't have that reversed necessarily. So that's an attractive quality. But of course, there's the flip side where they put out the address, and now it's publicly known what their Bitcoin address is.
Yes.
Hundreds and thousands of investigators are looking at that, and they're looking to see where that money moves. And so that actually hinders their potential payoff. In fact, I'd say that this scam is really a good model for us to evaluate, because it's so well known that we could say, in a perfectly compliant AML world for crypto, where you have you have perfect compliance, every jurisdiction, all the exchanges are doing all the AML KYC checks that they should. You have blockchain analysis tools which tell us where the cryptocurrency transactions are moving to and from. In that world, these scammers should not be able to use their Bitcoin, because in that world, everything, all the on-ramps and off-ramps are policed, right? If they send that stolen Bitcoin to an exchange to cash out for dollars or euro or pounds, then that exchange would flag it, and they wouldn't be able to cash out. Yeah. But we know that's not probably what's going to happen.
I guess we'll see. But also, it does touch upon a point in terms of like how the authorities have sought to regulate. They've sought to regulate the exchanges. But of course, once you obtain some cryptocurrency, it doesn't only have a life within an exchange, and not all wallets are necessarily KYC'd. And you can do person-to-person transactions without going through an exchange, of course. So, I mean, as a professional investigator in this space, and someone with extensive experience, does the topography of these crypto networks make it more difficult for investigators to, interdict and see what's going on?
I wouldn't say it makes it difficult for them to see what's going on. I would say there's actually a wide array now. There's a huge target area or a huge landscape for investigators to learn just because
Yes.
of the public nature of most blockchains, right? So that's there. Plus the fact that, we could talk about the more anonymous coins, but these scammers, they didn't ask for Monero, they asked for Bitcoin. They and there are reasons for that. So I would think that the landscape for investigating is still very ripe. I mean, in fact, once that scam happens, the Twitter scam, right? Everyone left and right was turning into a blockchain investigator, looking into these blockchain browsers to see what it looks like. But where I think, maybe where you are going with your question is there are still some loopholes and gaps that maybe the regulatory gaps and gaps that will hinder investigators somewhat. So for example, let's take what you said. So I don't want to go to a regular exchange because I know I can't cash out there. There still exist peer-to-peer exchanges, right? There are places that you can go where you could give someone the Bitcoin and then they could give you, cash, or switch from Bitcoin to another token. And do that multiple times, staying out of really the formalized, the compliant exchange space. That still exists. And that's why I say this test case of this scam, it's not a perfect world. There are jurisdictions that you can go to that will cash out. Maybe they're going to be harder to find. Maybe they will decrease because of everyone taking on the fat of standards, perhaps, but still that will exist.
Yes.
Then you have something else, which is more maybe sort of on the horizon, but we have to consider, which is even as we have more mature compliance and a more compliant environment, you still have at the same time developers in this ecosystem working to create more anonymous tools and more to make software available that doesn't play by our regulatory rules, such as more privacy coins. I mean, there's a strong effort right now to make Bitcoin, the most popular cryptocurrency, more anonymous, to make it so it's not like what we're used to today, where it's easy to track, and it's going to be more difficult to track. I mean, there are people working on that. So we have to be mindful that this is not a static ecosystem, that it's evolving as we're catching up to the technology.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And also, I guess we're seeing a panoply of other initiatives leveraging distributed ledger technology, but perhaps being developed by more traditional actors. For example, big tech players potentially developing, so-called stable coins, the rise of so-called crypto dollars, which are basically on-chain representations of traditional currencies, and also, most recently, central bank digital currency. And I know that's a hot topic in DC in terms of, okay, China's got a digital currency and therefore we need a digital currency. So what's your take on the evolution of the kind of whole space? And do you see the whole space, edging towards a more compliant culture and taking compliance into account at an earlier stage of design?
I think that what you described is it's going to be less the crypto industry becoming more compliant, although that is happening and will happen, right? I mean, I think I said that before, but I think what you're pointing to is something beyond that, which is the traditional financial sector bringing on board aspects of the technology to help with the traditional financial mission. And if you even think about it, I mean, from where you're sitting, I mean, looking at even the Bank of England and what they had proposed, I mean, they were looking at cryptocurrency just to learn from it and study it back as early as at least 2014, or maybe even earlier, but publicly talking about it in 2014. And now in 2020, are more formally exploring it and getting input. So they understand it. Other central banks are doing the exact same thing. So I think what that means to me is, I think it's natural that when institutes, there's an ideological component to cryptocurrency that we're very familiar with that came out of Bitcoin, right? But that does not prevent anyone from looking at aspects of the technology and saying, you know what, I don't like this total decentralized thing where it's totally anonymous. But I do like this tokenization thing where I can, I don't have to worry, I don't have the same headache with the clearing and settlement, if I use this technology. And they're going to think of ways to maybe integrate that. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing in China and with all these other proposals. So I think, I'm always cautious. I don't have a crystal ball, obviously.
Sure.
So I can't say I know what the space is going to look like. But I think it's pretty clear that aspects of this technology are going to be, melded into our financial system somehow. Not necessarily that it's going to be even a stable coin that everyone is using, but to me, it just seems pretty clear that there are a lot of advanced technological advantages that it makes sense that the financial system is going to integrate some of this where it's appropriate. And I think we're going to see pilots and trials, different attempts, but this is, I think, going to be a long process. I think this is something to watch for the next 5+ years.
For sure. And one point in particular I'd like to get your opinion on, which is whether, if there is a digital dollar, should it be a cash equivalent? In other words, should it have the same attributes as cash, meaning that it's fundamentally anonymous? Because that's one of the arguments which is made in some countries that are going cashless, like in Sweden, for example. The argument is made that cash is the only form of, if you like, public money available to people, and therefore we have to make a digital alternative. But there's a big difference between cash and cryptocurrency. There's only so much cash you can stick in a suitcase or under your mattress. There's an unlimited amount of crypto that you can stick on a USB stick. So as people grapple with this question about what should a digital dollar, for example, look like, should it be a better instrument? Should it be a cash equivalent? Should it be anonymous?
So this is what you described, right? This questioning of the pros and cons and understanding the differences between digital and physical. That's what has to be teased out. That is a societal, it's not just a regulatory discussion and policymaker discussion. That's a societal discussion, right? What does it mean if now I can transfer $100 million like that across the globe anonymously? Is that a world that we want? And what would happen if we have that? I'm on the side of no, we don't want that, because I know that would incentivize so much bad activity.
Yeah.
But your question in terms of what form it should take, maybe it's some of all of those things to a degree. Maybe the anonymity is partial with the users, but maybe there's anonymity up to a point. Maybe there is. It's not unlimited. Maybe you have these. Maybe if you do have anonymous cryptocurrencies, maybe because now you can program them. Maybe they can only transact up to a certain point. Maybe they have transaction limits, and you build that into the system, right? Maybe we figure out, maybe by trial and error over the years, we figure out, well, what is the most optimal anonymity, privacy? What can we deal with? I think that's what we're going to discuss. I'll caution though that the thing I'm concerned, because you mentioned the China side of things. I think the biggest. So my caution is that the banking system that we have, as imperfect as it is, in most of our democratic societies, where we have political liberty and privacy, protected privacy constitutionally, we have a really good system in that the government does not have real-time access to all of my transactions or to everyone's transactions. Now, yes, of course, the government has the ability. I always say there's not a wall, but there's a fence between, let's say, the government and your banking history. So the government can get your transactional history, but it has to go through a process. But there's not one computer, right? No, where someone at the Ministry of Finance or Treasury or wherever, or the central bank is, they can press a button, they see everything that you are doing financially. Now your bank maybe can see that, but again, the government can't see that. And I think if we're going to think about a digital currency, we need to think along those lines. How can we ensure that one centralized system is not controlling or has access to everyone's real-time
Yeah.
financial data.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because it would be ironic if a system like Bitcoin that was invented to enable privacy ended up eroding privacy. But you know, I've got one final question is this, which is, you know, the COVID pandemic, but also, you know, events that have unfurled in the US, I think have made all of us, you know, reevaluate, you know, what's important in life, and maybe start thinking about how we want to build a society post-COVID. You know, as I know you as a super thoughtful, you know, person, what's your reflection on what you hope for in your field of, you know, your professional field, but outside of that as well, as we hopefully soon move beyond this terrible pandemic?
My thoughts there are, you know, less technological. I think I know this is the last question, so I'll try to be concise. But you can't help but, for me, I can't help but think that this experience has been a bit of a reset, right? Whether it is dealing with the pandemic, changing our lifestyle, seeing social unrest, thinking about, you know, the dynamics in our society. All of this causes us to reflect. My reflection actually is that, as someone who's been focused on technology for so long, and I was drawn to this research area because I found the technology fascinating, really over the past year, I've started to feel more like, or more sure that really technology rarely solves our social problems.
Yes.
And that's a big, you know, a lot of technologists, they're driven with that sense of, if I can only create the perfect app and distribute it, you know, oh, there will be, you know, no oppression and poverty will not be there. And you know, that's just not that's not the case. And I think for me, if anything, this reset makes me say that in these conversations, I think, you know, those of us who are interested in technology actually need to be thinking outside of technology.
Yes.
How do we enhance our human relationships? How do we allow it so that people can manage and deal with the difficulties that are even on the horizon, because we know the economic impact of this pandemic? The technology itself maybe can be a part of that, but we need to have a bigger conversation, a human conversation, and that's how I think of it.
So the change isn't in the code; it's in the human heart and in our attitudes, right?
Wise words. Can I trademark that? Yeah, I like that. I see my email signature line changing very soon.
Hey, well, Yaya, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. You're very, you know, deeply versed in these subjects, and your words on these things have a lot of weight, you know, for me, and I'm sure they will for our audience as well. So I want to thank you sincerely for spending time with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. Thank you for all of the work that you do.